Good morning. We hope that we're finding you well. You are waking up and watching Ireland AM, you lucky thing.
It is Monday, the 21st of October, and we're with you until 10 o'clock.
Now, almost 16,000 homes and businesses, they are without power. 60 flights were cancelled at Dublin Airport. I don't know if you were watching those videos of airplanes trying to land yesterday, plus several sporting events. They fell foul of the weather yesterday with Storm Ashley.
Yeah. Finals cancelled. If you are waking up to damage from Storm Ashley, we would love to hear from you. Get in touch, 0896 111 111. We're going to have the latest across the show.
We will indeed. Now, from rising trolley numbers to record overcrowding. Tonight, a new documentary is going to shine a light on the crisis at University Hospital Limerick. Now, we have talked about this before. We've been in Limerick doing this. So whether you're a patient who spent time on a trolley or healthcare staff who are worried about the winter surge, if you have been in, around or near UHL in the last while, we'd love to hear from you on what the situation is there. 0896 111 111.
If you work there as well, we'd love to know how the stress levels are. Also on the show today, we say hello. No.
I like that you went down.
It's not Adele.
Hello.
No, it's not. It's the one and only Lionel Richie. We're going to be chatting to him after nearly 6 decades in showbiz. We're going to need a full hour to chat to him. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Very, very, very nice.
Cool.
Now, what's Alan's version of the hello? He went a bit more Adele over this side. Can you go full Lionel?
Is it beef you're looking for?
It is.
Oh my God. Is this the show throughout the day?
This is it today.
Love it.
Because there's braised beef cheeks on today's menu in the kitchen. We also have sparkly looks for party season on the catwalk, plus how to avoid scams. We'll be giving you all the latest details. Now let's check in with Deric. And Deric, has Storm Ashley passed us? Good morning.
Well, it certainly did pack a punch yesterday, as you heard there with the guys. 53,000 went out power this morning, and elsewhere the damage after it, power lines and trees down. So once again, exercise caution over the coming hours. Out there today really is the calm after the storm. I suppose we're still looking at showers through parts of the west later on today. The tail end of it whipping through with some more locally strong and gusty southerly winds, especially off western and northwestern coast. So all that to deal with out there this Monday. Now, ahead of our trips to Cork and Kilkenny later on this week, we've landed here in the heart of DCC, Dublin City Centres, where we're at this morning along Parnell Street. It is Irish Book Week all this week, so we're celebrating all things on Lower, and we're celebrating all things reading. So we're going to be catching up with author Felicity Hayes coming up a little bit later on this morning. Favourite book, guys? What's your favourite book? Matilda Roald Dahl, one of mine.
Mr. Men. Loved a bit of Roald Dahl back in the day.
Which one? Roald Dahl isn't Mr. Men, is he?
No, he's not.
No, he's not. Okay, lovely.
We should call us on the hop there this morning, Deric. Too many to mention.
Mr. Tired, Mr.
Absolutely.
Sleepy, isn't that it? Yeah. Now it's time to take a look at today's papers. We're going to start with the Irish Times. Taoiseach confirms election will be held this year. Preparations for an early general election, they're ramping up, as Taoiseach Simon Harris confirmed publicly for the first time yesterday that he expects to go to the people this year.
Fine Gael gambling on Brand Harris amid party exodus. That's the front page of the Irish Independent. The party are left reeling after Social Protection Minister Heather Humphreys announced her retirement.
The Examiner leads with forced to hire unqualified teachers. Primary schools estimate 1,000 teaching posts are unfilled and are increasingly having to turn to unqualified staff to cover absences as they struggle to recruit teachers, with pupils' education suffering as a result. Also pictured on the front is 7-month-old baby Grace Kennedy relaxing in the FAI Cup after Shelbourne beat Athlone Town at Tallaght Stadium yesterday.
One for the mantelpiece.
Oh, nothing better than a baby in a
Love
cup.
it. The Daily Mail also leads with the teacher shortages. Their headline reads, commuter belt hit hardest in shortage of teachers.
The Mirror's front page says, dig in hunt for Kieran. Gardaí are set to start a dig this week for a missing 8-year-old boy who is presumed dead. Investigators say they are making steady progress in the probe into the suspected murder of Kieran Dernan.
Sun leads with the Monk versus Mary Lou. Crime boss Jerry Hutch has told pals he's thinking of running against the Sinn Féin leader in her Dublin Central constituency when the general election is called.
The Star also goes with that. They say Monk can rock the vote.
And finally, the Herald goes with City Centre needs 1,000 Gardaí, says Task Force. According to the Dublin City Central Task Force, the government should fund 1,000 Gardaí for the capital city over the next 3-year phase plan. Recent figures show Garda numbers dropping to what the Garda Representative Association warned were crisis levels.
Yeah. been happening for quite a while
Sure
at this
has.
stage now. From Storm Ashley, aftermath to teacher shortages. We're going to take you through today's top stories. That's coming up.
Yeah, we'll see you after this very short break.
Now, the first storm of the season, Storm Ashley, was short and sharp, with cleanup operations continuing today. And here with more is Met Éireann meteorologist Rebecca Cantwell. Good morning to Rebecca. Thank you very much for joining us. So tell me, has Storm Ashley passed?
It has, thankfully. Storm Ashley is now well off to the north, to the southeast of Iceland now. So we're still today going to see some gusty winds, but nothing like we experienced yesterday.
And tell me, was it as severe as we'd expected?
Yeah, so we did see max gusts of 137 kilometres an hour recorded there in Galway. So along the west coast was the most severely hit there, with the strongest gust, with storm force onshore winds there. But across the country, widely gusts reaching 90 to 100 kilometres an hour.
Was there much rain as well? Was there a lot of rain expected yesterday?
Rain was an element of it. Most of the rainfall would have fell in the early hours of Sunday morning. But there was a fair drop yesterday as well. Again, the worst areas affected were Galway and Mayo, where the rain was feeding in along with that wind.
And tell me, the weather warning systems that we have now. So we have yellow, orange and red. So what was in place yesterday?
So we had a nationwide yellow wind warning, and then we had an orange wind warning for western coastal counties from Kerry up to Donegal. We also had an orange storm warning at sea. So that was warning for storm force 10 winds out at sea. And of course, those then reach on the coast as well, where we got those highest winds. So we were expecting some fairly strong winds onshore as well, just along the coast, where we had the high tides, that mix as well. So a mix of those onshore winds and the high tides, because we were in a period of very high spring tides as well. So everything just accumulated together to create fairly bad conditions there along the west yesterday.
And it was called, so Ashley was yesterday. So we have this now where we name these storms. Where did this idea come from?
So the idea is we name storms along with our colleagues in the UK Met Office and the Dutch Met Service, the KNMI, because of where we're geographically located. If a storm is going to affect us, it's more likely to affect them as well. So the idea is to name the storms so that people might remember the name, and then maybe would remember the warnings as well, and then act towards the warnings, because sometimes warnings go out and, you know, there could be warning fatigue, but with the storm, people remember the name, and then hopefully, you know, we'll be able to protect more life, protect more property, and people will act then. Because
so hopefully we mightn't see one for a while, but what's the next one? Do we know?
The next one is Bert.
Bert?
Yeah.
Bert. So hopefully we won't be seeing Bert for a while. So listen, tell us, what are we expecting today and the rest of the week? And of course, there's a bank holiday next weekend. What's the weather going to look like?
So, as I say, today there'll still be some gusty winds around, but nothing like yesterday. It's more in the way of sunny spells and just blustery showers. The same for tomorrow, Tuesday, more well-scattered showers, a bright day. And then Wednesday, maybe a little bit more cloudy with some patchy rain or drizzle. And then there is likely going to be some more rain on Thursday. It's a little bit uncertain at the moment. It's a waving front on it, so the details aren't exact as of yet, but it looks like it could possibly be a wet day Thursday. And then there's a little bit more uncertainty because of that towards the weekend and the bank holiday. There may be rain moving in on Sunday, but it may not materialise until later. So there is a possibility of some good weather at parts of the weekend for the bank holiday, but the details aren't exact as of yet.
Okay, let's keep it positive. No Bert inside. Rebecca Cantwell from Met Éireann, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now it's over to Tommy and Mirren.
Thank you very much, Alan. Now we're going to go through the other stories making the front of the papers this morning with News Talk's political correspondent Sean Defoe. We can see pictures of Storm Ashley at the front of a lot of the papers this morning. But the Irish Times, Taoiseach confirms election will be held this year.
Yeah, we're gearing up. It's like political Christmas now, you know. We're getting ready to go.
Excitement.
Yeah, they're finally doing away with all of these nonsense that it isn't going to happen this year. So Simon Harris kind of bounced into it by Roderick O'Gorman. He on Friday said he wants November 29th and he was going to bring it up at their meeting tonight. They meet every Monday night and he was going to make sure that the discussion was had. So now they all have to get in gear and they can't pretend they're not talking about it. And over the weekend, Simon Harris said it's going to be this side of Christmas. Micheál Martin sort of saying, yeah, let's get our bit of work done and then we can go. So it is coming. November 29th is the most likely date at the minute, just by the time you work out how long do they need to pass the finance bill, get their housing targets over the line, do the supplementary estimates, which is basically passing a resolution in the Dáil to ensure the departments don't run out of money. All those things you need to tick off before you get there. But November 29th, some talk of December 6th. I think that'll be a terrible date. Everyone's out at their Christmas parties and night of the toy show. So I think 29th seems like the most likely.
Yeah, because finally the toy show has gone back into December, which we've been waiting for ages. So it does seem December 29th.
That's going to be such a weird one. It's like moving All-Ireland final day for me.
It is, but it's better. It shortens it all down. So that's happening. We're hoping November the 29th because of all the myriad of reasons that you've said there. But now we're talking about what's going on within the Fine Gael party, because Heather Humphreys has become the 8th Fine Gael TD. 18th, not to contest the upcoming election.
Yeah, it's a big change because there's this sort of tale of two Fine Gaels going on. On one hand, you have Fine Gael riding really high in the polls and they're 5 points clear of the nearest party at 24% in the Sunday Times poll yesterday. And then on the other hand, you have all this exodus of TDs. More than half of the TDs they got elected in 2020 are retiring or leaving politics or going to do something else. And Heather Humphreys was a real shock announcement at the weekend because she's the deputy leader of Fine Gael. No one saw this coming when Simon Harris picked her and got her into the cabinet team earlier on this year. He had sort of looked for assurances that everyone was running again. Now, there was references to her health in the statement. We don't fully know what the story is. Now, we obviously hope that it's not just a health issue, but she also said she kind of she's given it her all and wants to step back. So Heather Humphreys isn't going to run again. And that presents a constituency problem in Cavan Monaghan because she absolutely would have taken a seat and they would have been challenging for a second. They'll probably still take a seat. The second becomes harder. And when you drill down into the Fine Gael figures, you're seeing that in a lot of constituencies. So they have this really high national profile, but you have that problem in Cavan Monaghan. You have the likes of Dublin Bay South, where Kate O'Connell is running as an independent. That kills any chance of a second Fine Gael seat. Dublin Rathdown, where the former minister Alan Shatter is running as an independent, kills any chance of it, or well, certainly damages any chance of a Fine Gael second seat. Then constituencies like Roscommon, where their candidate John Naughton sadly passed away a couple of weeks ago. He would have been very likely to take a seat, and now they're in a bit of trouble. And then all these other areas where they just have candidates with sort of low profile. So as the Indo splashed on today, and as you know, I've been saying for a few weeks, Brand Harris. That is going to be the Fine Gael plan.
But why, like, for somebody to make such a late announcement like Heather, like, what a blow to Simon Harris. Do you think there's something going on behind the scenes?
Like I say, I don't know if it's something to do with her health or something within her own life that she would be stepping away, because it is very late in the day. It's only a few weeks out for an election. Hopefully that's not the case. We don't fully know yet. She hasn't done an interview.
Her press conference after the budget was very interesting because she just didn't seem to have time for anyone's kind of rubbish. She was like, well, people wanted the double payment. They like it. We're giving it to them.
But that's also very Heather Humphreys too. It is very,
I know, it is, but it also,
that's why she's very popular.
She has said, she was kind of like, I've done my time.
Yeah, and she's a straight-talking politician, like you say. That is kind of why she's popular. So maybe she is just, look, I've been here for more than 20 years as a public representative, just trying to step away. But as you say, so late in the day, does
huge pressure on Simon Harris to try and carry that whole brand for him. Then very interesting in front of one of the papers as well this morning. So Jerry the Monk Hutch looks like he's going to contest the general election in a very hotly contested area in Dublin.
It's a remarkable story. You know, I don't think anybody saw this one coming, and a number of security correspondents over the weekend saying it, that they were hearing from their sources that he is very strongly considering
Nicola
running.
Tallant has been talking about this for a few days now, going, this is happening.
This is happening, that he's going to put his name forward as a candidate, which is sort of remarkable given he was up in, in a very, very serious case in the courts and was ultimately acquitted only a couple of years ago. He hasn't been convicted in Ireland since the 1980s. He's obviously been living in the Canaries for more than a decade, but has retained Irish citizenship, so can run as a candidate. It would be interesting because Dublin Central, Mary Lou McDonald's constituency, Pascal Donoghue's constituency, there are big names there.
Nessa Horrigan,
Gary Gannon as well.
Wow.
So there would be a really interesting dynamic, and there seems to be a bit of a mixture of opinions. Some people thinking he did a lot for some certain groups of people within the constituency and supporting boxing clubs and things like that, and then others pointing out the obvious, that this is a man who is synonymous with criminality and that has done horrible things to the North Inner City in Dublin.
So we're living in The Wire. This is what's happening. Like, is this
Season
what's
4
happening?
of The Wire, it's the political side of it.
McNulty's going to be on the streets at some stage.
It's remarkable. It's just the way this election is shaping up is going to be fascinating because it's so different different to what we thought it would be even this time last year.
I'd say you didn't have this as this is
Wasn't
next
on my
bit of
bingo
notes
card,
that
I
you
have
need
to
to
say,
do.
no.
We'd love to hear from you. 0896 111 111 what you make of the elections. We've got lots more to talk about. We're going to be chatting about teacher numbers.
Teacher shortages as well.
And a new documentary highlighting the hospital overcrowding crisis.
Plus, we're also going to discuss the stories in the back of the papers.
Railway Cup.
But listen, Sean's going to stay with us. We're going to talk to him after the break. Now, another story at the front of a lot of papers this morning is teacher shortages are making the headlines. A new survey finds that almost 1,000 vacancies nationwide in primary and secondary special schools as principals struggle to fill the posts.
Yeah, we'd absolutely love to hear from you this morning, whether it is in primary or secondary schools, because we know so many secondary schools have had to drop subjects because they don't have teachers to teach those subjects. 0896 111 111. News Talk's political correspondent Sean Defoe has kindly stayed with us. Sean, thank you so much. So what's this about unqualified teachers filling primary school posts?
Yeah, and that term kind of fills you with a bit of dread, unqualified teachers, doesn't it? Or unqualified people subbing in as teachers. Now, quite often it seems to be people who have something related to it. Early years educators, for example, who do a sort of a top-up course basically and can get a teacher number and then can then teach in primary schools or certainly substitute in primary schools for a certain amount of time. And look, this is not a new thing. You know, for years they have been trying to fill posts when there are maternities, when people are on career breaks or whatever. It used to be the retired teachers that were always brought in, and now it seems it's going even beyond that. And then filling the vacancies is even harder because there's more than 1,000 vacancies at the moment in the system. If you talk to any teacher, I think in the 5 weeks that in the 5 weeks since the term has started, there's been more than 750 posts that haven't been filled. There's just a real shortage of teachers around the country, and then particularly when you look at somewhere like Dublin, because the cost of living is so high, it's not very attractive for someone to come up here and find accommodation and live there. So it's a real getting into Dublin and the commuter belt.
That's a commuter belt.
Is really difficult.
Dublin, Wicklow, Kildare as well. 1,100 registered teachers who are not qualified. So they are registered. So I gather they can do a top-up course and potentially get a teacher number.
Yeah, but that seems to be the way. You can register with the Teachers' Council then. So it's not someone walking in off the street and saying, yeah, I'll sub the class. They have to be registered with the Teachers' Council and go in that way. But there might be someone who has, an early years qualification, something like that. Yes. And then you have the other scenario where SNAs, and there was loads more SNAs funded, announced in the budget, but they are acting up then into more mainstream classes, and that obviously leaves the students that they are meant to be helping out, who could be considered the most vulnerable students, without that dedicated teacher who has that skills to mind them.
Now, Minister for Education Norma Foley, she has said there are now more teachers than ever working in the Irish education system, with almost 79,000 employed, and there are 122,000 on the register.
There's also more students than ever. This is the thing when you only get one side of the story. And something that has always baffled me about the Department of Education is the forward planning, because surely with students it is the easiest thing to plan for places, because you know how many students are born. You can take that most of them are going to stay in Ireland. You can see them entering primary school, and you can plan ahead 6, 7, 8 years to when they're going to hit secondary school. And yet when you hear some of the stories and the principals who have applied for prefabs or applied for extensions or whatever they need, and 4 or 5 years down the line don't have the approval or don't have the shovels in the ground, absolutely baffles me that can still be the case in Ireland. So trying to you almost have to register the child as soon as it's born to get a place in secondary school in some parts of the commuter belts at the minute. It's absolutely crazy.
I mean, when you're told that there's pretty much 80,000 employed, but a record 122,000 in the Teaching Council register, like, where's that 40,000 who aren't? Would that include teachers who are maybe taking leave? Who've gone abroad? To think that they're losing out on 40,000 potential teachers that are maybe missing from the system.
Yeah, because there are some who are on career breaks. There obviously would be some who are on maternity. There would be some who we just talked about who are doing something different but registered. There could be people who are retired who've kept up their registry in case they wanted to do a bit of subbing to fill in. Or
Norma Foley herself would be on the teacher register.
Yeah, half the Dáil, and half the Dáil after this next election could be teachers as well. There's all sorts of teachers in the Dáil, and I think you can take up to 5 years in some cases as a leave.
And they still haven't. There's been talks for years. We were talking to one teacher here just a few months ago who's in Dubai, and he said, well, I can't come home because I'm going to be on the lowest pay scale. I'm back down to the very bottom. There's talk that they're going to try to do something so that you can entice people back by going, OK, well, you don't have to start at the very rung.
Yeah.
There's always talks about this, but nothing has been set in motion, right?
No. Well, not that I know of anyway, set in motion. Now, this pay scale is actually possibly more than we would have thought it was. Like the current public sector pay deal means the teacher starting salary is going to rise to €46,000. So, it's not nothing. It's absolutely not nothing with a maximum of 85 grand a year. You know, there's a lot of people who'd say, geez, 40
with your
grand is a starting
holidays
salary.
and stuff as well. And listen, we know a very difficult job, but I mean, that's a great job with the pension as well.
Yeah.
0896 111 111 if you've been affected, if you're a teacher who's having to cover for other teachers, if you're a parent whose kid is missing out, we'd love to hear from you. Again, 0896 111 111. Now, there's a story in the Daily Mail this morning, which I think is... I always hear about Irish households. They always talk about this 1.1 billion euro in deposit. And you kind of think, oh, it must be in everybody's bank accounts. But then this is a pretty alarming story, Muireann.
1 in 4 of us has less than €500 put away for a rainy day.
Wow.
Which does seem like it is not a huge amount. Men, again, as you said, that so many people are kind of planning this. But the poll found that men are more inclined than women to have a larger financial cushion.
There you have it.
I would have said the opposite. I would have said actually women were better savers than men.
But if you are saving, you're doing the outgoings, because if you're doing the shop and you're buying the kids' clothes and you're doing all that, you're going to have less money, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's talking about how important having that financial cushion is, and particularly in this day and age with obviously jobs so high, but the way the prices are going, to think that 65% of people have a cushion less than €5,000. And they talk about wanting to have 3 months' wages to try to look after yourself. And 25%, less than 500.
If you have 3 months' wages, like fair play to you. I don't know how anyone gets to that.
But people are having to save up for
like,
deposits. People are having to save up for rent. You know, it's not easy to have this kind of cushion.
But you have to dip into it as well. I've certainly found to dip more into the savings you have over the last few years because everything's so much more expensive. And you budget your X amount for groceries or whatever, and then you get to the end of the month and go, actually, I need that extra €100 or that extra €200. And then actually putting aside that money is a lot more difficult than it used to be.
But it is the weekly shop.
Yeah.
That is it. Like, I cannot get over it. Every single week, I'm like, why is it €20 extra this week again?
100%.
It's really, we'd love to hear from you. 0896 111 111. Do you have a financial cushion? It's not just the running away money, it is how you're doing that. And is it the things like the weekly shop, or is it the petrol? What are you noticing that's really draining the bank account?
It's how difficult is it? But it says it is an effective money management. It's a core tenet. There you have it. Sean Defoe from News Talk, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks a million.
Right, we're turning to the back of the papers, talking sport after this short break.
Welcome back. Now, the Railway Cup, it was back for the first time since 2016, and there were lots of new rules involved, and our lads were betting.
The Railway Cup, all 4 provinces, the Interpros are back. Join us to discuss that and more is Gavin Cooney from the 42.ie and former Dublin footballer Paddy Andrews with the Off the Balls Football Pod. Good morning
to
you both, guys.
Great to have you with us.
Very well.
Paddy, so the Railway Cup, we had Ulster against Connacht, Leinster up against Munster, trialling these new rules which Jim Gavin and his committee have tried to bring in to make Gaelic football a bit more appealing, a bit more easier to watch. What was your verdict?
Well, look, there's been a lot of talk about this over the course of the full year. So Jarlath Burns, the new GAA president, one of the very first things he did was set up this football review committee to try and make Gaelic football a bit more entertaining, a bit more free-flowing. It's been on probably the wrong path over the last probably 7 or 8 years. So the rules, lots of trial games have been going on behind closed doors, but it was the first time the country got to see the matches on Friday night and Saturday night in Croke Park. They were entertaining games, far more high scoring, so the rules did what they said on the tin. But the challenge is that's the only time we're going to see them now. It doesn't mean the rules are in completely. They have to go through Congress next month and they're going to be voted on whether these are all 7 main enhancements, whether they're going to be brought in for the 2025 season. I thought the games were entertaining. We've seen the scores, massive scores
to penalties.
in the final.
Ulster against Connacht ended up going to penalties, which is always exciting. Like that, you think about the hurling matches, it always comes down nip and tuck towards the end. That's what you want.
It was. I think Friday night in the 2 semi-finals, you could see particularly Connacht bet Leinster pretty well. You could see players were probably struggling with some of the changes. 3 or 4 of them don't make massive difference, but the biggest one is the 3-on-3, guys staying inside. They have to stay up in the opposition 65. That's a fundamental change from what these guys have been playing for the last 10 years of their career. So that's what I'd love to see coming in. It favours forwards. We want to see more scores.
Opens the space up.
Oh, way more space. We could see defenders having heart attacks in the back.
Yeah.
But if that comes in, that would be a massive, massive change for GAA. And it's hard to see. Personally, I don't think all of them are going to get in.
See, this is the thing, Gavin. There's an awful lot. There's an awful lot of new rules.
Yeah.
The three, the 1-by-1 throw in, the no back pass to the goalkeeper,
Scoring
solo
system.
and go. The scoring system where if you're outside the D, essentially like basketball,
2
you get
points.
2 points.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
And this has to go through Congress. And we all know that sometimes things take an awful lot of time when it comes to GAA. They mightn't be the most, let's stay up to date with everything. So what do you think is going to happen? Does it have to be one and all of them, or can they pick and choose from this buffet now?
Well, it sounds like they're going to pick and choose from the buffet, but like ultimately, like you say, the big one is the 3v3. Like that's what fundamentally transforms the game. Yeah. The other ones will enhance the game, but they won't transform it, and the 3v3 will transform it. So that's such a radical change. I mean, we're all quite cynical and we're used to reading about GAA Congress every year, and they don't exactly embrace radical change in the space of a year. So let's see. I think it was a very good idea to trial these games and showcase them to the nation and mic the referees up and, you know, open the doors to Croke Park and let everyone see them in action. One thing I'd say about these games is that they were designed to showcase the rules. Every other game of Gaelic football you'll watch are there to bend the rules. So let's see how they play out when teams prize winning above all. And I think where there has been a misstep is that the pre-season competitions, the O'Byrne Cup, etc., they've been junked this year, and they were actually a good opportunity to further see the rules in action and then maybe have the vote after that.
The game needs radical change, so Paddy. Like, I think in my own sport of rugby, you're doing anything to try and open the game up a little bit.
Create space.
This is a really good opportunity for Gaelic football. Like, I bumped into Peter Canavan the other day, and he was saying that the club game is dying. That there are matches finishing up 4 points to 3. You know, it's just people just defend 15 men behind the ball or women behind the ball, and it's painful.
Women aren't playing like that. They're not.
But so they have to try and do, and radical changes are needed.
I think that's where it has an opportunity to make this change. There is universal acceptance that Gaelic football has become really, really turgid to watch. We've seen it at every level of the game, particularly we're talking about All-Ireland finals, the showcase games of our sport. They're just not good to watch. And there is universal acceptance that something needs to change. That's why this has gotten so much airtime, the Football Review Committee, the need for it. There is an acceptance that something has to change.
Will Jarlath Burns push this?
Well, this was one of the first things. He's been a very progressive president already in his first year in charge. And one of the first things he did was set out on how we're going to save Gaelic football. And that's what this committee is trying to do. So
I think when we're inside here talking to GAA players or people who are involved in the GAA setup, and they do still point to the women when they play football, and they're not playing that style of where there's 15 behind the ball. It is a much free-flowing game. They're still playing the sort of game that you saw in the 80s and 90s. And it's a pleasure to watch. It really is a pleasure to watch. So how are GAA player, from you talking to your mates, what's the story? Do they want this?
When you're playing yourself, you're just doing anything to win. That was it. And I would have played in a team which was very successful, but we probably...
But if you're killing the game...
that doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter?
No, it's you've got to win. And that was it. And that's the reality. It's probably not fair to ask the players and coaches. They're in it. They just need to be successful. It's not their responsibility to try and entertain the game. That's why having a Railway Cup was more like a testimonial weekend. The games were really exciting. We watched the Dublin Championship final yesterday. Coolock beat Kilmacud Crokes. It wasn't a great game to watch. It was very much high wire stuff, lots of long periods of possession. If you gave me a choice to watch, now on the outside, having retired, would I rather watch the Railway Cup final on Saturday night with massive scores, Ulster beating Connacht, or yesterday's Dublin Championship final? You know, it's no choice at all. I know it was probably more entertaining, but like I say, we're going to have to wait and see in the next month or so what does actually come through. But the biggest thing, Tommy, you said, there is an appeal. People know something has to change. Whether it's these 7 major enhancements, we'll have to wait and see.
There you have it, listen, it's very, very interesting, but it is pretty much a national sport, and it's sad to see it dying on its feet, particularly around all areas of Ireland as well. You mentioned there Coolock beating Kilmacud Crokes, I mean, their first ever title, and that is there were a lot of other finals
14
all over the country as well. A huge amount of them were cancelled, unfortunately, due to Storm Ashley, so they're going to all have to be replayed as well. Lots of other sport to go through, but I think this is a topic worth talking about. I think we have to discuss it again.
We've eaten up all the time, Gavin. I'm so sorry. I apologise.
That's all right.
0896 111 as to what you think is involved with all of these things. And to let you know, of course, he's football pod over here from Paddy Andrews. Cooney and O'Carroll with the podcast here. And then this bucko as well coming in with his podcast as well.
When's yours?
I'm just saying, what?
You're next.
We're in talk sport.
Yes.
Well, Abel. No bother at all. Gavin Andrews. Or Gavin Cooney, Paddy Andrews. I did that all thing into the one person.
Thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Act.
We'd love to hear from you. 0896 111 on the new games and what you made of the game the other day, the Railway Cup. Back with you shortly on Ireland AM. Now it's time to take a look at the front pages. The Irish Times says Taoiseach confirms election will be held this year. Simon Harris has confirmed publicly that he expects to go to the people this year.
Fine Gael gambling on brand Harris amid party exodus. That's the front page of the Irish Independent. The party are left reeling after Social Protection Minister Heather Humphreys announced her retirement.
The Examiner's front page forced to hire unqualified teachers. Primary schools estimate 1,000 teaching posts are unfilled and are increasingly having to turn to unqualified staff to cover absences as they struggle to recruit teachers. Also pictured on the front is 7-month-old baby Grace Kennedy relaxing in the FAI Cup after Shelburne beat Athlone Town at Tallaght Stadium yesterday.
I remember my daughter, that
delighted.
little hat as well. Love it. The Daily Mail also leads with the teacher shortages. Commuter belt hit hardest in shortage of teachers.
The Mirror's front page, dig in hunt for Kieran. Gardaí are set to start a dig this week for the missing 8-year-old boy who is presumed dead. Investigators say they are making steady progress in the probe into the suspected murder of Kieran Dernan.
The Sun leads with the Monk versus Mary Lou. Crime boss Jerry Hutch has told pals he's thinking of running against the Sinn Féin leader in her Dublin Central constituency when the general election is called.
The Star's front page, Monk can rock the vote.
And finally, the Herald's headline, City Centre needs 1,000 Gardaí, says Task Force. According to the Dublin City Centre Task Force, the government should fund 1,000 Gardaí for the capital city over a 3-year phase plan. Recent figures show Garda numbers dropping to what the Garda Representative Association warned were crisis levels. There you have it. Jack O'Keefe's
bit of popping going on. He's getting ready for his beef.
The kitchen is popping away there.
Now, you will have heard there were cancellations, delays and diversions at airports all around the country due to strong winds of Storm Ashley.
Yes, joining us now with the latest is Graham McQueen, Media Relations Manager at the DAA. Good morning to you, Graham. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure you've been up to your eyes at the minute. Can you give us an idea of the disruption we are seeing, particularly around Dublin Airport?
Yeah, thanks, guys. It looks certainly a much better picture today. The winds have eased this morning, so the first wave of flights is moving really well at Dublin Airport, so that's good. But it was a really challenging day yesterday. We had about 80 cancellations over the course of the day due to Storm Ashley. We also had about 40 airlines who did go-arounds, a bit like what you see on the screen there. The plane comes down to land. The pilot's not happy that he can get it down, so he goes back up again and they go back around and try again. So about 40 times that happened. And then we also had 34 planes that diverted to other airports. The winds were really, really gusty yesterday. So when they did try to come down at times, it was just too challenging for them to get down on the runway. But flights continued right through into the early hours of the morning. We had one departure coming in about 5 this morning that was significantly delayed, but we got those people home. So a challenging day. We got through it and hopeful of a much better day today with the lesser winds.
And I was watching, I think we were all watching this yesterday, and fair play to the pilots who managed to land so many of the planes. I know that there was an awful lot of people who were very worried on those planes because there was such turbulence. But with all the flights that were cancelled coming in and leaving Dublin Airport, when are you expecting to be back on track, Graham, do you think?
It'll get back on track quite quickly, Maren. A lot of passengers yesterday who couldn't maybe get on one of the early flights on, say, Aer Lingus that was cancelled might have moved to a Ryanair flight. Other people would have cancelled their journeys altogether if they were just going for a day for a football match or something like that. We have been busier this morning, though. The security queues are a little bit busier than what we would normally be on a Monday, but we staffed up in preparation for that. So we're getting everyone through nice and quickly. But over the course of today, tomorrow, those people will get away to where they want to get to, and we'll get back to normal, hopefully without any bad weather.
Absolutely.
Very good. Well, you mentioned there the queues in security at the moment. I'm sure you've seen it in the paper or the news this morning about a New Zealand airport slapping a ban on hugs for longer than 3 minutes. Is this something Dublin Airport might bring in to try and ease the congestion? No more goodbye hugs.
The drop-off zone, yeah.
Drop off and away you go.
Well, we're huggers at Dublin Airport. We do like hugs, certainly, Tommy. But no, not something we're looking at Dublin Airport. They do have it at Cork Airport, actually, which sits within the DAA group as well. They have what's called kiss and fly, so a little bit more emotional, a kiss maybe perhaps than a hug. But for the moment, no, we're keen to encourage people to drop and go, not linger too long in our departures road. If you do want to have a lengthy hug or a lengthy kiss or whatever, park up in the car parks in the short-term car park.
How long do the people frequenting Cork Airport get to kiss for?
A kiss, I know.
They get 15 minutes, so Cork are obviously much more romantic than the New Zealand people.
They were all watching Rivals this weekend. Fair play to the people of Cork.
Kiss and fly.
I love that in the New Zealand airport. For fonder farewells, please use the car park. And I think, Graham, you're saying the exact same thing. Graham McQueen, Media Relations Manager with the DA. Listen, really appreciate you joining us this morning, and great to hear things are back moving fairly smoothly
Well done, fair
again.
play. Yeah. Thanks so much, Graham.
15 minutes down in Cork. I
Kiss
love
and fly.
It. But I mean, it's fair enough. 3 minutes. I was sort of saying, because it says here, like to get the love hormone oxytocin going in your body, all you need is a 20-second hug. So if you're doing that for 3 minutes, the oxytocin is flying around yourself, isn't it?
Listen, if you're
But
dropping
it's not
someone
what you
off,
need when you're getting on a flight.
open the door yourself, get your bag, and off you go. Good luck. Thank you,
So
Graham, for getting in
romantic.
touch with us.
Yeah, so romantic. 15-minute kiss and fly.
0896 111 111. You can tell us about your kiss and fly experience if you want.
Now, still to come, superstar Lionel Richie is going to be joining us from Los Angeles.
We're going to have expert advice to avoid falling prey to scammers.
But up next, a new documentary on the overcrowding crisis at University Hospital Limerick. Back with you shortly.
Staying with us now. Tonight, a new documentary highlights the overcrowding crisis at the University Hospital in Limerick.
Virgin Media News correspondent Richard Chambers, he has spoken to families who lost loved ones at UHL, including Ashley, who is fighting for answers after her mother's death last year. Let's take a look.
She had been in, unfortunately, in 21 actually, with an infection, and she couldn't get a bed, and we were ringing every single day. At this point, I knew the bed manager's name, and I would ring her, and they just didn't have the beds. I think it was 7 or 8 days. And when I rang to complain, they said she had been the longest person waiting on a trolley at that time. I think someone has beaten her since.
That's just someone who's... Richard, thanks for joining us this morning. That's Ashley, who's fighting for her mother, and her mother is gone. These are the stories that you're hearing so much when you went down to investigate what was going on in University Hospital Limerick.
Yeah, this is something which has been repeated so many times. You, of course, you know yourself, you know, all of the chatter around UHL, and I can only imagine what it's like to be a staff member working under the microscope there. So everybody we were talking to, they've all have nice things to say about the staff who looked after their loved ones in their dying hours and dying days, but the conditions in which their loved ones were forced to suffer effectively in those dying hours and dying days was, you know, beneath the dignity expected of people in a first world country.
Now, you followed 3 stories here, which are, like, to watch it, it's heartbreaking to watch. Can you just tell us about the 3 stories briefly?
Yeah, there's a couple of different stories in it. Karina Leahy, we spoke to, she's the first person you'll see in the documentary tonight. She talks about her dad, Pa, who was a huge figure in rugby in North Cork and Limerick. He was a keen member of Charleville Rugby Club. He was outlining pitches just a couple of days before he went into UHL. He died a short time later. And I can only imagine what that family has been through. And again, this is something which actually stuck out to me in making the documentary. When you're trying to tell a story about, you know, issues relating to UHL, for example, people have to come and they have to share the worst thing that's ever happened to them. And they shouldn't have to be forced to do this, to make sure that nobody else goes through the same situation that they did. But each of the stories, whether it's Karina talking about her dad, Pa, you saw Ashley Dickinson there talk about her mum, Rachel, and as well as that, Melanie Cleary, whose highly publicised case of her daughter, Eve, dying of blood clot after hours and hours and hours on a trolley before being discharged. Each of these people point to the same issues time and time again, whether that's chaotic scenes in the emergency department, long waits, 7 days. Ashley Dickinson's mother was waiting a couple of years before she died. She had to go through similar situations 2 more times in the future, ultimately, including the time that she died. But the chaotic scenes, the staff shortages, the inconsistency of care at times as well, whether, there's handovers from different doctors to different doctors. Now, this sort of thing can happen in busy emergency departments and hospitals, but it is something which, does deprive people of dignity.
It does, and we know that Aoife Johnson's case, a 16-year-old from County Clare who went into UHL in 2022, she ended up dying from sepsis, and as we have gone, the inquest has happened. It just seems that there was a series of mistakes and errors and handovers and these things. There's no sort of streamlining, which is what you're showing in this documentary tonight. But do we see any accountability, Richard?
That's the thing which actually sticks out to me, because we're obviously heading towards a general election within the next month. The issues around UHL have been long-standing. People in the Midwest, whether that's in Clare, Limerick, North Tipperary, have been screaming about this for a long, long time. And if you go all the way back to when they actually changed the configuration of how the region would work, that there would be one emergency department in UHL, that they'd close the emergency departments in Nina, Ennis, St. John's as well. The reason that they did that, and that was whole predicated on boosting the capacity in UHL to begin with. Now, obviously, we saw Frank Clark's report into Aoife Johnson's death, said that they never got near the capacity that they needed to do to even close those in the first,
others,
but even to close them in the first place, that they didn't boost up the capacity in any sufficient way. Now the region is much bigger than it was, and that capacity is now far beneath what it should be, according to the experts. So, people will have heard the quote from one of the most senior consultants in the emergency department describing it as a death trap.
That's right. That came up time and time in the documentary. When you're calling a hospital and an emergency ward a death trap, I mean, it must be frightening for people living in that area, thinking that they have to go into that hospital.
Yeah, and it's tough as well when you're making a documentary on it, because you don't want people to be... You don't want to make something that makes people scared. That's not what we did. That's not what we did. We're looking to examine an issue. But it is also very difficult for the staff members there who are working under those conditions. The Irish Nurses and Midwives Organisation, for example, pointing to the impact of these long delays and working under such conditions in the emergency department on the mental health of staff, for example. The amount of nurses who have left UHL over the years because of those conditions. They also point to the fact that there will be poor outcomes as a result of overcrowding and long stays on trolleys.
Because we think when we hear of the hospital, the emergency department comes in for a lot of criticism. But in some of your stories as well, it's on the wards and the chaos in the wards sometimes.
Yeah, but this is the overall capacity. The overall capacity of the hospital is a problem. And that is something, obviously, they're trying to address that at the moment. They're building on new blocks to the hospital as well. Obviously, in the inquest into Aoife Johnston, we heard, one of the consultants say that they don't believe that will actually make enough of a difference. Yeah. So there needs to be real changes in the Midwest. I know the government has talked about, well, we'll look at this and see whether or not we should change the reconfiguration. We'll look at whether or not it is a good idea to reopen other emergency departments. But these things should have been addressed long by now.
They should have, because when they closed those emergency departments for the centre of care, it was people in the region going, no, please don't, please listen to what it is that we're saying. We know that overcrowding is a thing that we deal with every single year, and we're highlighting every hospital. Literally every hospital has this. Last year, the INMO recorded that 122,879 patients were waiting for beds in hospitals around this country last year. It used to be a crisis and make the news when there was 300 people who were waiting for beds. Yeah. Is it the sort of thing now? Do we get answers for this anymore? We never see we've asked Stephen Donnelly to come onto this couch numerous times to talk to us about various things. We've got a natural children's hospital that we never know is going to be open. And then these hospitals that are trying to function around the country with an increasing population and not enough staff.
Yeah. It's a horrendous situation. It almost feels like, because we report it every single year, and multiple times a year as well. So it isn't just a winter crisis now. You do see it sometimes in the summer. In the summer just gone, we saw huge overcrowding in UHL once again before they did something to try and alleviate the pressure. But the fact of the matter is, this is something which people are almost desensitised to now to some degree, unless you have, a personal connection to it, as so many people in the Midwest do with UHL. If you don't know if somebody who's been in a trolley for multiple days or over a day, whether that be anywhere in Dublin or Cork or Galway or wherever else, it's an awful situation, and it is way, way worse than it should be.
And you were saying there the winter, because we always know about the winter and the crisis that happens in hospitals over winter. They must be very worried then in Limerick about the winter coming in and what's going to happen.
Yeah, you chat to staffing representatives of the nurses as well as local GPs in the area as well, and all of them are dreading the winter that is to come. You know, you'll have multiple, viral infections floating around, COVID, flu, all of the normal things which you associate with winter. But as well as that, people are already quite scared going in there. Never mind the winter. Like, they have patients in their GP practices begging them not to be sent into UHL, the regional centre of excellence, which is not, again, this is something which people should need to be thinking about because everybody thinks about when it comes down to an election, who's going to do what for me. We have long-standing structural problems in this country, particularly around health, which need to be looked at and taken seriously.
There's just one quote, Miriam, I just wanted, a family member who'd lost a loved one said, I could not believe that this has happened in Ireland.
This is going to be on tonight. It's UHL Ireland's Hospital Crisis. It's on at 10 p.m. on Virgin Media 1 and Virgin Media Play, hosted by Richard Chambers, who looked into the hospital. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today, Richard. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, later this hour, with a surge in scams, we're going to hear one woman's story of having her identity stolen.
Plus a low-cost, slow-cooked bowl of deliciousness in the kitchen. We'll see you in a few minutes. Now, we're so looking... You're miles away. We're so looking forward to this. Now, we're kicking off the week with a low-cost comfort dish.
Yes, Jack, Beef Cheeks O'Keefe is with us. Good morning to you, Beef Cheeks.
Beef Cheeks.
What's the crack?
So that's what we're having. Beef Cheeks this morning, along with some nice mash I see you're making as well.
More of a puree than a mash. We're going to make it really fancy.
Oh, lovely.
Okay, very good. So this is a slow-cooked kind of meal, is it?
Yeah, it's a slow-cooked meal. You can use any cut of beef that's tough and it's sinewy and it's a bit gnarly.
That be, Jack?
That little piece there, I think, is only about maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd say maybe about 5 or maybe less. Now, look, beef cheeks aren't super cheap. They're cheaper than a fillet. They're cheaper than a steak. But because there's only 2 cheeks on a cow, they tend to go up, same as like lamb shanks and stuff.
Can you go, like, if you're talking about a tough, would it be like a shin? What other areas would be?
Yeah, beef shin. You can make an ossobuco using this technique, which is beef shin. You could use oxtail. You could use anywhere off the shoulder, the forequarter. Again, I always harp on about the local butcher. Pop into your local butcher shop and talk to him.
Yeah.
A butcher will tell you, don't ever come into my shop and ask me for cheap meat, because I'll give you cheap meat. But that's what you want in this situation, right? So I have a casserole pot on nice and hot here, or you could use a frying pan or whatever. I'm getting it really hot and have a good bit of oil inside it. Now, a little bit of salt onto it. So don't trim it, don't remove any of the fat, because it's all flavour.
Okay.
And this is something like, this is a technique that I was one of these chefs that was blessed to kind of be doing my training during the 2009, 2010, or 2008, 2009, 2010 financial crisis. So we had to learn how to use really cheap cuts of meat to make them taste really expensive.
It's going to go on fire.
Okay. That's what you want.
Oh,
the fire brigade is outside.
So you're wanting to just really seal off this meat now,
Get it nice and dark all around. Right?
So is this to kind of seal it off before you slow cook it?
Yes. So what I'm doing is I'm just giving a nice little char on the outside, making it look nice, dark and delicious.
The fire alarm's not going to go off and we'll all have to evacuate the building.
We hope there's no sprinklers.
This is what happens when I cook a steak in the house at home. The kitchen is...
So simple as that. Get it nice and brown all the way around. And then I have some mirepoix, which is just celery, carrot, onion, and a little bit of garlic. Just roughly chopped. Look, I don't even have the carrot peel, don't even have the onion peeled. It's all rough.
Fire them all in.
Chuck it straight in.
Are they dirty?
No, I washed them.
Oh, okay.
Just think of it like, think of the veg almost like a tea bag. You're not going to be consuming them.
Okay.
Some sprigs of rosemary. Get all that sauteed off together.
Beautiful.
And then some beef stock or chicken stock. You can use a stock cube. Pop it in.
Surely you'd use the beef stock there, no?
Beef stock, yeah. Beef stock there. But it's whatever you have knocking around at home.
All right, okay.
Just enough to barely cover the beef, if you can see.
Okay.
Pop your lid on, cover it, and the special part is into the oven at 140 degrees Celsius for check it at 4 hours. But generally, anytime between 4 and 5.
A long time.
140.
Is this perfect for a slow cooker then?
If you have a slow cooker at home, perfect. Yeah. Absolutely perfect. In fact, we do this at like work quite a bit in the restaurants where we'd use beef cheek or feather blade, and we do it for 12 hours overnight at 90. Sorry. So we do 90 degrees for 12 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
and
you couldn't leave stuff in for 12 hours.
If you have a slow cooker, you could.
Yum.
Or if you had a smoker or something outside, you could do it in that as well. Right?
Yeah.
Now, that's it. Set the Alexa on the timer or whatever, right? Inside my pan here, I have some sugar. This is how to make a proper chefy gravy, or we call them jus, right? Yum. So I have water and brown sugar, same quantity.
Leave it on the thing because the camera can get it, yeah. There
Just
you go.
Turned into a caramel, right? So this, I have a bit of juice that I've taken from the one I cooked yesterday.
Okay.
So all I do is I take some red wine vinegar, Deglaze the pan.
Yeah, it's important to get that, like, with that sugar burn.
Yes,
if you
keep
leave
an
it
eye
on
on it.
too long. Okay.
Keep an eye on it, right?
Red wine.
Some leftover red wine from last night.
Okay.
You've leftover wine from last night.
I had to be I behaved myself last night going, remember now?
So that's red wine vinegar and then red wine?
And then red wine.
Okay.
And then just let that reduce down, right? While that's boiling away.
Tommy's taking this seriously
Yeah,
now.
no, I
want
to make this, yeah.
This is the perfect sauce at home, right? Now, make sure your fan's on because the vinegar hits you in the face, right?
Okay.
Inside here, I've just cooked off some cur pink potatoes and some celeriac.
What potatoes?
Cur pink. I just like to use cur pink for mash. I just find it gets more fluffy, right?
What's a cur pink?
I know, don't worry about it, it's potato.
I'm being fancy, right? Celeriac.
Yeah.
So I've just diced it up, popped it in at the exact same time as the spuds and just simmered them off as if I was making a mash.
Okay.
And now what I do with my mash, and any kind of time I'm making a mash or a puree, I'll always use vegetable stock. I put a little vegetable stock cube into the water with it, and it just gives it more flavour. Okay. And then I just blend it.
So you're blitzing your mash.
Blitz the mash.
You got one of them?
Wow, that's taken to next level.
While I'm blitzing it,
I do, yeah.
I'm just adding in a few cubes of butter.
And loads of cream.
And
oh, these are going to be gorgeous.
Double cream.
Oh my God.
Just give it a buzz then.
Are they not then? Oh my God. Can you even taste the potato?
No.
You taste the butter and cream.
The potato's a carrier.
Yeah.
It carries all the flavour of the celeriac. And you can just blend away for a few minutes to get it nice and smooth.
Right, let's
and you can see it's more like a puree, right?
Oh my God.
Okay, so we've got the potato.
Right.
You've got the jus bubbling away there as well.
Is that all you do in the jus? Is that it now? It's done?
Oh, no. I'm just going to pour in a little bit of this beef stock into it.
Oh, okay.
Right? Have it up on a high temperature. And I'm going to show you a little secret trick in a second, right before I finish it, right?
Go on, we're quick. Do you want me to get the food out?
I'll get it there now. Now.
Look at this.
There we go.
So I cooked this yesterday. And I just reheated in the oven at 170, 180 or whatever, just for a few minutes, just to soften it up. But now watch this.
Hello.
Just look at this.
Oh, yeah.
Instantly starts to fall apart. Just grab a sharp knife. Just give it a slice.
Your fingers. Oh, there'll not be much of this left for everyone else today now, I'm afraid.
You have an item after this, Tommy. Tommy's gone, damn!
Sit it down on the mash like that. Look at that.
Look
you don't even need like a fancy gravy, right?
And then a bit of jus over it. Okay.
Go on.
Come on.
We're running out of time, but
just a little bit.
Looks delicious.
Look, if I had more time, I'd reduce that down a little bit more to get it nice and thick.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. Come on, just give it to us.
And
are you not using any of the vegetables then that you had?
No, vegetables are too good for you. This is meat and mash day.
Okay. Jack.
Oh, wow, that just falls apart.
Oh, look at that.
It's the most important part here, realistically, was the beef cooking technique. For people at home, like, just go into your local butcher, ask him what he has, and just follow that exact same technique. It's foolproof.
Slow cooked beef with that absolutely
gorgeous mash. My mother watched me make that.
It's
and she did the exact same thing as meal prep for my nana for the whole week.
It's absolutely delicious. Thank you so much,
Jack. Time for a short break. Now we'll be back in a second.
Wow.
Very welcome back. Now, as the online activity of cyber criminals grows, the victim count continues to rise.
Alicia O'Sullivan opens up about her experience with identity fraud in tonight's episode of Real Life with Lucy. Let's take a look.
So take me back to that morning when you woke up and there were 100 messages on your phone. How did you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I was in shock, I think. And I guess your first idea is, God, like, I hope someone I know didn't do this to me. You know, you start to think to yourself, like, geez, like, did I draw this on myself? You should never feel guilty for being a victim of any crime. This concept of sextortion, of, you know, using someone's image, using someone's identity to try and, in a sexual way, to try and make money, and that's what they were doing.
It's such a violating feeling. Horrible.
Alicia joins us now alongside Paul C. Dwyer, cybersecurity expert and CEO of Cyber Risk International. Thank you both so much for being here. So, Alicia, you're talking there about something that happened to you in April of 2021, where you woke up to loads of messages and there was a fake Instagram account of yours had been set up with real pictures of you and then fake pictures of your head superimposed onto nude bodies.
Or the shoulders down.
Yeah, like some other girl, you know, I don't know who that girl was, which is also like a whole other person that was a victim of something like this. And yeah, I suppose they were trying to claim that these were photos of me, and they also had a link to like a pornographic subscription-based website with a paywall claiming that there was more videos, more content, illicit content of me. And, you know, you kind of think people would realise that those images are clearly not of me, but there were people who believed that it was me. And that is the scary thing about it, you know. People are like, well, they're not of you, you know, that could be way worse. And I imagine there are people who are victims of that, and that is so awful for that to happen. But I think people believing it is you is awful as well, and can be really damaging, you know.
How heartbreaking is it? I'm sure your heart drops when you wake up to receive those messages, and I know some of your friends were sending you screenshots of what was being posted online.
Yeah, really shocking. And you know, we have Coco's Law, which is a really progressive law in this country, and thankfully it's covered under this type of crime, and it's good for people to know that. But I think people didn't really know much about it at the time. It was introduced in February 2021. This happened in April, so people weren't really aware. This is something that if it happens to you, you can report. For me, there was not a lot of information out there, which is why, you know, we started the organisation Safety Over Stigma to create awareness, create education, try and change the law, try and make social media companies take more responsibility and protect users of social media better, you know, more.
So safety over stigma, we'll get to that in a second. Paul, how common is this? I woke up this morning to 4 emails saying someone's trying to get into your Instagram account. How did you try to reset your password, right? How often does this happen, that someone sets up a fake Instagram account of someone, and why are they doing it?
Well, unfortunately, it's very common, and they're doing it for the motivation of money generally. So cybercriminals, their motivation is money. They need to find a way to make money. So they were using the fake images of Alicia as bait to get money and to bring them into other behind a paywall sites. And they don't care what the impacts of that are, because think of what the impacts could be, because you got that cyber world where people think, oh, it's only on cyber, it's only online. What happens if somebody sees that and thinks it's for real and gets motivated to do something physically in the physical world towards Alicia? That's the connection of that digital cyber world and the real world, and the threats as well.
Paul, how big is this illegal industry, cybercrime?
It's estimated that next year it's going to be up to $10.5 trillion in value. And to put that into context, the biggest economy in the world is the United States, second China, third would be Japan, and it's in between Japan and China. 20 times the economy of Ireland. Look at it that way. 20 times the economy of Ireland.
So there's illegal organisations making huge amounts of money from this. So are we able to stop, like, because a lot of it is done through these tech companies. Do they have any handle on it?
They do have a handle on it. It's a great phrase to use. They do have a handle on it. Do they care? No. Are they motivated? No. There's no regulation to stop them doing this. Coco's Law, whether it's GDPR or any of those things, they laugh these things off with impunity because there is no moral conviction to do something to protect people. Criminals go where people go, and all the criminals run these social media networks, and they're making money out of it. They are the backbone of the underground economy of cyber criminals.
Wow. But we know companies can take down fake. We know that they can know it's a fake account. They know that that's a fake ad. They know it's a fake thing. But why aren't they doing it? Why aren't they taking it down?
Their AI can do it, Maureen.
Yeah,
so they don't even need a human being to do this. Right? They can spot these things.
But why aren't they?
They're not motivated to, because they make more money by having the traffic and the people and the criminals. I mean, Tommy, you were a victim of this as well. And even the people that put up those fake things of you, they paid money to do that through those social networks.
But the big thing for me when I came across this, and I'm sure, Alicia, you were in the same position, is that whenever a profile is set up like this, where do you go? Because it's not like there's a button or an email address or a phone number to get in touch with these social media companies. So you did go to the guards. Because this is new for the guards as well. It's a very difficult thing for them to tackle. What was your reaction or their reaction?
Yeah, I think they probably didn't really know a lot about social media, unfortunately, the 2 guards that I did meet with. And Coco's Law, like I said, was really new, and I think nobody really knew how to handle this type of case, especially when the images, you know, weren't of me. And I suppose everyone didn't really know where to go. And I was kind of left to, like, with no report given or anything. And I was really disappointed. And I kind of decided, like, look, there was 2 options. I either just let it go and just forget about it and just forget it happened, hope the page comes down, because at this stage, obviously, it was still up. Yeah. Or else, you know, like, keep going and, like, try and get someone to listen to me, because if it happened to me, it's obviously happened to someone else and will happen to more people in the future with the advancements of technology. So I kept going, and eventually I did meet with some really great detectives and guards who listened and took it seriously and took the case forward. And I suppose, like, for me, especially with the campaign, like, we're always trying to get people to report it and not put people off. And like, by more people reporting these crimes, we can get more advanced with how we take these cases forward, how we get data from the United States through Instagram, obviously based in the US. So there's a lot of legal issues if the perpetrator or the hacker or such is outside of Ireland, outside of Europe. You know, you're meeting all of these barriers, all of these difficulties. So the more people that report it and the more advanced we get on dealing with these cases, the better, so that, you know, people can get justice at the end, which is really important.
We did ask the guard in relation to this. The complaint has been investigated. However, to date, it has not been possible to take any prosecution in its complaint, and Garda Síochána does not comment on remarks made by any injured party. They can't comment on a specific case. But you decided this campaign. Tell us about it. You now, when something happens to someone, you're like, you can come to us. We'll try to do something.
Yeah, we've helped a lot of people privately, obviously, and a lot of people who've been victim to this and haven't felt that they could go public with it, or people who haven't told their family, friends that this has happened, have been part of the campaign, have felt that they've got justice in this way by educating young people. We've gone to schools, we've taught loads of kids about digital literacy, about being responsible online, knowing how to report a crime, knowing your rights when you go into a Garda station. Also, we're working on a formal education programme. We've worked on the Online Safety and Media Regulation Bill. We've spoken in front of the Oireachtas Committee. We've worked with the Department of Justice on their campaign. So we're just trying to do as much work as possible and bring people along with us as well.
Trying to make people feel safe. But at the end of the day, it comes down to these scammers and these cyber criminals, Paul. In terms of bringing them to justice, is it as tricky as ever? Is it happening?
It is, and there are successes there. I mean, in defence, if you like, of the Guards, they're completely under-resourced in this space, but they are some of the best detectives in the world in relation to cyber, and they're working strongly with Europol, Interpol and so on, and they're taking down these huge elements of it. But it's organised crime. You know, so it's not somebody, a script kiddie in their bedroom just trying this on or whatever. These are people with massive resources. You look at the team that took down the HSE, the Conti ransomware group, 160 million in 1 year with 60 staff. They run like a tech company.
They are. They're real jobs. You can see them in places that they have. Well, this is on the Real Life with Lucy Kennedy tonight at 9 p.m. on Virgin Media 1. Alicia O'Sullivan, who's a victim of this, what happened to you, and also Paul C. Dwyer at Cyber Risk International. Thank you so much for talking to us about this today.
Guys.
We really appreciate it.
0896 111 111 if it is something that you have been affected by. Now, what's coming up later in the show, Alan?
I'm surprised you know how to use your phone. Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, reading up all my notes all night long. We've endless love, because in the next hour we are going to be meeting the one and only Lionel Richie. Come to town.
This week on Ireland AM, we've partnered with Very to give one lucky viewer the chance to win an amazing prize. We're giving away €2,000 to shop the newly launched Carol Byrne by Very fashion collaboration, which features everything you need for the upcoming party season. From glam sequins to tailored separates and more. These are only available to shop on very.ie or on the Very app. Whether you're getting ready for a work party, date night, or family gathering, the Carol Byrne by Very collaboration has the perfect pieces to ensure you look and feel your best. For your chance to win, just answer this question. What date is Halloween traditionally celebrated on? A. 25th of December, B. 31st of October. To enter, call 1550 999 333 or text WIN to 57199. Best of luck.
Good luck with that one. Now, we were speaking earlier on about University Hospital in Limerick. Richard Chambers is hosting a doc tonight called UHL Ireland's Hospital Crisis. That's on Virgin Media 1 and Virgin Media Play, and people have been in contact about their experiences.
Yes, it's on at 10 o'clock tonight. And we have a text in living in Clare, and any time we had to attend Limerick University Hospital, it was a frightening experience. In fact, when my father, who is not from the area, came with me to the emergency room, he said it was like a war zone.
Absolutely, we hear that a lot, but we do have a positive message. I want to give our positive result from UHL. My dad is 90, is a high-risk patient. We were 30 minutes waiting in the emergency department, was seen by a nurse, got his checks done and was moved to the geriatric emergency medicine department, and he got the most amazing care. While I was waiting, every patient was treated with the best care. I know tonight will be hard watch, obviously, on that show, but we had a positive experience, and there's no doubt about it. Everybody is trying their best.
Yeah, a family friend got through UHL, got through the hospital in 6 hours the other day. They did an incredible job. The triage was fantastic. So fair play. We'll see that a little bit later on. We're also talking about teacher shortages. So there's so many teacher shortages around the country, a huge amount, almost 1,000 places in primary school without teachers. And a message here, I'm a primary school teacher who recently qualified after a career in a totally different field. I have found the lack of job security, i.e. trying to secure a permanent role in teaching, to be horrific, while also trying to secure a mortgage. My experience has been that most of the positions available in my area, they are temporary roles covering the likes of career breaks and maternity leave.
And from a mum here, Maeve said, my son is in 5th year. There's plenty of subjects that still have not been filled. They're just plugging the gap with short-term cover, but he is starting his leaving cert.
Yeah, that's very tough.
This is from a teacher of 30 years service at one school. And she said, I can see that the vocation culture of teaching is no longer there. It's not an attractive career. Would I encourage my kids into teaching? Sadly not.
God, that's a damning indictment of it. We were talking earlier on as well about the delays from Storm Ashley and some of the Trojan work done by pilots yesterday in landing those planes in airports around Ireland. You know, there was Kerry, there was Shannon, there was flights delayed everywhere. We were delayed coming home from Birmingham, but the staff on both sides were amazing. We flew Ryanair, needed airport assistance for my mother. Unbelievable service. Took 14 hours to get home to Portarlington from Birmingham, but we won't complain about it. They were fab.
Look at those flight. Somebody coming in from Brussels yesterday. Coming in to land, the plane was rocking from side to side, terrifying all the passengers. How the pilot got us to the ground is beyond me. A big spontaneous round of applause erupted throughout the cabin from the passengers. We were so lucky to get home and not be diverted.
A real round of applause, not the fake one.
Look at this one. That's like, glad they have a long runway here in Dublin Airport.
This fella trying to get down. Still did it though. Look at that. But look,
you could watch that forever, couldn't you? But can you imagine you're coming into
I'm terrified because I'm a bit afraid of flying. When I see that, I'm terrified. I would have been terrified on those flights.
Terrified. Well done to all those pilots as well. I hope got it all sorted.
And thank you for sending in all those messages as well, because we've covered an awful lot on the show this morning.
Still to come, glam looks for party season.
Deric discovers why we are the land of scholars this book week.
Plus, up next, we say hello to Lionel Richie.
And then we can stop the puns.
Yeah.
I swear to God.
Lionel Richie's up next.
You're very welcome back. Now, our next guest had us at hello.
Hello. Yes, his powerhouse vocals of songwriting skills have earned him 4 Grammy Awards, an Oscar, a Golden Globe, and a spot in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
We can, of course, only be talking about one superstar. It is the amazing Lionel Richie. Good morning to you, Lionel. Great to have you with us. Before we get chatting, let's take a little reminder of some of his biggest bangers.
Wow. Come on and sing along all night long, all night, all night long, all night, all night long, all night long. Oh, what a feeling, dancing on the ceiling. Oh, what a feeling when we're dancing on the ceiling. Hello, is it me you're looking for? I can see it in your eyes, I can see it in your smile.
Lionel Richie, good morning to you. It's brilliant to have you on us with Ireland RM.
Alan, Tommy, let me just say this to you. It's too early in the morning, but thank you so much for the enthusiasm.
Well, listen, those songs have certainly put a spring in our step this morning, so thank you for that. We finished there on Hello, Is It Me You're Looking For? iconic lines. Yeah. Where did the words come from? What was the thinking behind that one?
You know what? It's so funny about that song because it started out as a joke. My producer was coming in, and he walked into the studio, and I was on the piano, and I leaned over and I said, "Hello, is it me you're looking for?" And he said, "Finish that song." And I said, wait a minute, I was just joking. He said, no, that's a great song. And for the first 2 weeks, I didn't like the song.
Wow.
Because I thought it was too corny. And then I did finish the song, and then I fell in love with it. But you have to understand, it was just so simple. It was almost too simple to say this. People can't relate to that.
Yeah.
And of course, it's now around the world as a calling card for everything in the world now for me.
It really is. I mean, it's so iconic. But then Adele got in on the act and she went, "Hello? Were the lawyers called at any stage?"
No, you know what? It's so funny. When she said that, when I heard it, I said, "Excuse me?" But then I realized that I can't own hello. No matter what happens in life.
Yeah, it's like happy birthday.
So when she said, "Hello, it's me," I said, "Okay, you're clear."
She answered your question.
She answered the call.
Well, it's really interesting because, like, some of the incredible songs that we just heard there, you have many, many more as well. And you questioning, is it too corny? How do you know when a song is finished and when it is right? Is it a case, like, had you other songs that you thought would have been even better, should have done better?
Well, to be honest with you, I had to realize something that what makes the hit record, and it's called simplicity. If you find a phrase that people say naturally, for example, "all night long" is all night long. "Hello, is it me you're looking for?" Stuck on you. Easy like Sunday morning. In other words, these are phrases that they're not gimmicks. They're things that people say every day. So I own easy. I own all night long. I mean, now when you say all night long, you go Lionel Richie. You know, it's common language that makes the hit record stay forever. That's the key, as far as I'm concerned.
But Lionel, was there a time when you were in the studio or you're writing it and you're going to go, "That's it, that's going to be a #1"?
I would love to sit here and take full credit and say, "Oh, yes, of course I knew that." No, I didn't. At the time, it all comes out as a feeling. It all comes out as a vibe. You know, and my co-producer, James Carmichael, used to say to me, "Before you throw it away, finish the song, and then we'll see about it." Okay. But don't try to be the manager or the agent of the song before you finish it. Just get it from the other side, listen to it, and then evaluate the song. And that's what's happened in most cases. I mean, for example, "Dancing on the Ceiling," I kept thinking, I don't know where this is going to go, but I'll finish it. It's it. You know what I mean? Yeah. You just have to kind of follow the lead. Easy like what? Easy like a sunny day, easy like what? Finally, when you get easy like Sunday morning, made all the difference in the world. But it's a moment in time when you don't quite have it until you have it. And then there can only be those words forever. It's just the way it works.
It's unbelievable. Simplicity is the key. You mentioned some of your classic hits, but one of the other songs that you're almost most well known for is "We Are the World." Of course, it is for following on from Bob Geldof, Do They Know His Christmas Live Aid, but it raised an incredible $60 million to fight famine in Africa. You must be so proud of that.
I am so proud of it, and I'm also proud of the team. I mean, first of all, it was Michael, Quincy, Harry Belafonte. It was Harry Belafonte who actually brought me the idea in the first place. And then it was, assembling Stevie and Michael and Quincy. It was only supposed to be 4 of us, 5 of us, really, including Harry. The next thing I know, we have this choir of some of the most successful artists in the business in the world sitting there singing in this choir. And of course, now The Greatest Night in Pop is now out with the behind the scenes. And to see Bob Dylan and Tina Turner and all these wonderful people, the ego was not in that room. It was all about the talent. It was all about coming together to make our voices, lend a hand to someone starving in the world. So it was a fabulous moment, I must tell you.
Like you said, ego at the door, please, because we are here all for the one cause.
Yeah, and Alan and Tommy, I'll tell you something. I thought about this over and over again. Could we pull that off again today? No.
Why?
Because the first thing is we can't, with all this technology, we can't sneak up on the world. The world did not see this song coming.
Oh, yeah.
Now with all the technology now, with Instagram and with, TikTok and you name it, live streaming, by the time you go and sneak in a room to do it, the whole world knows it's coming.
Listen, you've just announced that you are coming to Ireland next year. Very exciting. You've spent quite a bit of time in Ireland over the years.
I can tell I've been there a lot because every time I get into the country, into the city, they go, "Welcome home, Lionel." that means you've spent some time there.
What still drives you to want to go out on the road again and again?
Okay, so I know this may sound a bit tacky, but it's true. I'm in love with what I do. This is not a job. In fact, I'm very fortunate to announce that I've never had a job before in my life when it comes down to this business. This is the hobby that I discovered, and this is what I do. So a lot of people think that I go around the world and do shows. No. I go around the world. I call it a vacation. It's called a tour. And I go to some of the largest festivals and arenas in the world to see what the crowd is going to do.
Yeah.
I have the best seat in the house.
You're 75, coming to play in Dublin, playing in Belfast, playing in some of the biggest festivals. How do you keep fit?
You know what it is? I'm using this it's not a joke, it's actually for real. I'm using Mick Jagger as my poster child, okay? I figure if Mick is on that stage, running the stage, I've got a shot at this, okay? And the thing about it is, some people, they play golf, some people play football, some people play tennis. I do a 2-hour show that it gives me complete exhaustion and my adrenals, I'm sweating to death, and I'm in shape.
Listen, I was at home. Halloween is coming up. It's big in our house. We were with the kids looking for outfits. And it turns out you've got a few Halloween outfits as well. Have you come across anybody dressed up as a Lionel Richie Halloween outfit?
Kerry Washington was Lionel Richie last year. And so I thought this year I would probably, I'm just trying to think who I'm going to come out and be. But, so far, every time I put on a costume, they keep calling me Lionel Richie. So I guess I'm going to be Lionel Richie again.
You're doing a pretty damn good job at it.
But you've made it in Ireland because there is a flooring company in Ireland and they lay lino and they've called their company Lionel Richie.
No.
Yeah. Yes, they lay lino and their company is called Lionel Richie.
Listen.
Lionel, when you come to Dublin, make sure you drop down to Lionel Richie and say hello.
You know what? I'll hold you to that. Remind me of that, because here's what I'm going to tell you. I want you guys, Alan and Tommy, I want you guys to come to the show. I want to be able to see you all backstage, because one thing I like to do is, if I'm going to see the community, somebody's got to show it to me.
Okay.
So you guys are on.
Well, when you're over, drop in and say hello to us, because you are coming. It's the 3 Arena on Sunday, the 1st of June. 2025, guys, so you still have time. And Belfast SSE Arena on Saturday, the 31st of May. And tickets go on sale at 10 a.m. this coming Friday. It's going to be sold out. Myself and Tommy are going to be in the front row. Lionel Richie, we cannot wait to see you next year coming back to Ireland.
I cannot wait, guys. And as always, the thank you goes to the fans. Thank you for all these wonderful 40, maybe 50 years of showing up. I'm having the greatest time, and I hope they are too. I look forward to another great tour, and I look forward to seeing them.
Yeah.
Listen, Lionel, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Pleasure to talk to you. Have a great day.
Love you guys.
Thank you
Love
so
you so much. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Oh, we'll do.
There you go.
I'll tell you what, you're not going to be front row. I'm backstage.
well, there we go. Personal invite from Lionel Richie to his concert next year. Ticketmaster this
wait.
Friday. Yeah, great
there you
stuff.
go. What an absolute legend.
Legend. Fabulous.
Now, pottery season is just around the corner. It's time to start hunting for those spotlight stealing outfits.
Spotlight stealing outfits. And Lorna Wakeman has them all to show us this morning.
Yes,
Good morning to
I'm
you.
going to steal your spotlight.
Steal away, darling. Steal away. Steal away.
Okay, let's start with Sarah.
So Sarah is in an absolute showstopper of an outfit. So our clothes today are from the Carol Byrne party wear edit with Very. So Carol curates amazing party wear clothes, and this is just such a, like, you would definitely silence a crowd walking in an outfit like this. It is the mixture of textures which really
I was going to say, is it not unusual to have the heavier jumper with when it's glitzy?
It is a bit, but actually, if you think about it, we're comfortable in jumpers, and when you go out at night time, I think it's nice to feel comfortable and not to feel too structured in your outfits. And knits and other textures such as sequins and metallics has been a massive kind of seasonal trend over the last few Christmases. So if you think about how much wear you'll get out of a jumper, when you add it to something like this, you're like, gosh, I never would have thought of putting
it has been a massive. I've been doing it the last few years. You don't want to go too over. You need to make
exactly. It makes it just that little bit more understated. Now, I honestly love the kind of full, really over the top look. But this is just so iconic. It's
so wearable,
so wearable. And we have to talk about red actually as just a seasonal colour as well. And when you actually want to wear a full kind of head to toe colour, mixing the textures is actually a really good way to do it, because you see the difference in the colours then, and the sequins just pick up the light so beautifully. Isn't it beautiful? And the length of it is perfect, because it's just not short, it's a mid kind of length, so your shoe option here is huge.
And you've gone with the kind of Prada inspired.
Aren't these absolutely beautiful? So the little bow detail on it as well just adds a little feminine touch. Not too high a heel, but it's really good with that mid-length skirt, so you get a little bit of elevation just to keep your body in proportion as well.
Change the colour then with the bag, so you just want to go all red.
Exactly, and I think also just that little bit of contrast is great.
There's a bit of metallic look in
that. A little bit of metallic on this too, but also it's kind of got like a wallet bag to it, so it's great for a night out. Put everything that you need into it, and that's it. But also you can take the chain off and just use it as a little kind of clutch bag too.
That's
very clever, isn't it?
Absolutely,
it's lovely.
Now Marwa, oh wow,
isn't this beautiful? We can't really go an autumn, winter, or a party wear season for 2024 without making a nod to burgundy, because it's been such a big trend. Have to highlight that the velvet quality and the structure in this blazer is absolutely perfect. It's really beautiful and something you will actually have for a really long time.
So rich.
Sometimes with those blazers, they miss it in the midpoint when it is that sort of material. Whereas this is exactly as you want it.
It is, and also because it's a double-breasted as well. You've also got a really beautiful seams that give a really beautiful shape, and the size range on this is 8 to 22, which is great as well. So you'll get a really lovely option of styling with this tailoring like this. And we also want to kind of show that tailoring is actually a really big seasonal party wear trend in itself. So the matching trousers,
can you buy them separately?
You can buy them separately. Yeah, they're V by Very as well. €38 for these trousers, such a good price point as well to try a trend. And then you can mix and match each of the pieces too and get such long wear out of them. But just to kind of show again that contrast kind of stylist tip I love is just to add in a little bit of detail. A micro trend in itself, which is animal print, works so beautifully with burgundy as well. And these strappy ones are great because they will take you everywhere, even with denim, with a dress, but they look so perfect to just kind of punctuate this outfit. And matching bag. Isn't this so lovely? And actually, the amount of stuff you can fit in this bag is amazing, which is great. And this is from Public Desire, and that's from very.ie as well.
Gorgeous. That's a great outfit, Mara.
Isn't it
beautiful?
beautiful?
It's really beautiful.
It is
so
that
nice.
kind of like quiet luxury look.
It's lovely.
And I think when you put it on, you actually feel very empowered in tailoring, and it's a gorgeous night out option too.
So good.
We saw this earlier on. This is really cute.
We got a hint of this earlier as well. There's very kind of Y2K feeling about this combination too.
There is, but we bought the silver trousers last year, and they're still going. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you can do with this is we've got a combination going on here. There are little kind of diamante details on this cardigan, which means that your accessorizing is done. That's it. It's just, you don't need to add anything to it. And also, we were just talking backstage, is sometimes you don't think about pastel colours for winter or for party season, but this icy blue and the metallic just really
so good
works.
at metallics.
So good. And also
just in the blue.
This one just comes in the blue, and you've just got that lovely kind of combination with this cold tone of the metallic trousers, which are a great addition to the wardrobe.
Yeah, because a lot of them last year, like say mine would be, they're quite baggy. The cigarette trousers and the silver are lovely.
And you'll notice the cut on this is beautiful because they hug the hips really well. You've got a little bit more room and a little bit of stretch on the thighs, which is great. And because they're kind of like a 3/4, not even 3/4, 7/8, let's say, finish on the trousers, your shoe option here is great because your shoes will stand out and your outfit won't take over from them. And then you've got, with the metallic, it's like you're continuing the trend the whole way down to your feet, which I absolutely love. And the comfort factor in this
they're going to be great with runners as well, those trousers.
Great with runners, exactly. And then we have to finish with the silver bag as well. And this kind of holding your clutch like this is a big catwalk trend. So so you'll be able to kind of like, actually Victoria Beckham did it, and you kind of like, you're holding your bag in kind of a big theme.
She has them like this.
Yes.
Biggest bags in the world and nothing in them. I love it. And Sarah is doing the little black dress.
Just take out year after year.
We can't talk about party wear without a nod to the little black dress, which is just such an amazing piece that has such, you know, timeless feel to it. But this one from Carol's edit is probably one of my favourite pieces because of the high neck. You've got that fit and flare feel to the dress. So
this silhouette is very big. Molly May wearing a lot of this sort of silhouette.
Exactly. You've got the long sleeve, which we love. It has like almost like a thick scuba effect to it. So there's structure in it. And there's actually like a vertical seam that goes from right up on the neckline all the way to the bottom. So it's holding its shape. Even when it's on the hanger, it sits perfectly. It sits perfectly.
And you've gone with dark tights.
Dark tights because I love black opaque tights. They're
lovely.
great. And if you want to do the mini dress look and you don't want to go bare legs, opaque tights are where it's at. And then don't be afraid to do your party shoe with your black tights. I love it because you get the little details standing out that little bit more.
You can see it.
Yeah, and it's
a lovely pair of shoes, actually.
Aren't they gorgeous? And they have a little silver heel as well on the back. So even though your outfit is quite dark, all those tiny little details are really making it stand out. And then this beautiful bag, which is lovely. And again, with all these bags, you can actually take the chains off them and put them inside and have them like a clutch, which I absolutely love. And our clothes and accessories are coming from very.ie today.
They're absolutely gorgeous looks, like all four of them. Stunning.
Absolutely lovely and comfortable too.
Thank you,
beautiful, Lorna. Thank you so much. Fabulous.
Now, coming up next, Deric meets some of the toughest literary critics around.
Where is he off to? We'll talk to you very shortly on Ireland AM. Those literary critics.
You're very welcome back. Now, from bards reciting heroic tales to Oscar Wilde and Sally Rooney, we are a nation of storytellers.
We certainly are. And as this is Irish Book Week, we asked Deric to find out why it's so important to support Irish authors and illustrators.
And, of course, independent bookshops. He's at one of the most famous in the country. Deric, how are you getting on?
Oh, one of the most famous indeed, where we've landed down here at Chapters Bookstore on the heart of Parnell Street in Dublin City Centre this morning. We're joined now by Felicity Hayes. Your name is on the book, Felicity?
My name is on the book.
A published author, of course. We're celebrating Irish Book Week all this week. Tell us about it.
Oh gosh, well, it's an opportunity really to celebrate books, book selling, publishers, illustrators. It's a thing that's there all the time in our lives. Bookshops, books. People who enjoy reading just kind of take it for granted.
I mean, as Tommy mentioned there, we are a nation of storytellers, aren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't go into a pub, you can't go into a cafe, you can't go into a school, but people are sitting around chatting, telling stories.
How important is it to celebrate Irish authors and Irish books?
I think it's really important just to concentrate for a week on what we've got, because Ireland is extraordinary. I mean, I spend a lot of my time abroad, and I come back to Ireland and I see the wealth of books and bookshops and how bookshops are at the very centre of Irish communities, and librarians are there talking to booksellers are talking to readers. Something to celebrate.
I mean, we've all the kids behind us from Mount Carmel just up the road. That's where we start them at that young age.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, these are readers. These are people who will chat about books to each other, and they don't have it shoved down their neck. I mean, I'm 70 and I can remember a time when librarians were sort of behind a table and you were a bit scared of them. kids nowadays have a chance to be empowered amongst books. And I think that's fabulous.
Now, obviously, you're a published author. This is number 13 for you.
Yes, yes. This
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you very much indeed. And this one is actually, I was really delighted to be asked to be an ambassador for Irish Book Week, because this is a book set in a bookshop.
Yeah, and where did the inspiration come from then?
Well, I did one of my books in the past. I did a big book signing tour. I did 80 Irish bookshops in 18 counties. And I just came away with this sense of the stories that booksellers have and what dynamic, exciting people they are. So that was great. I started off, okay, create 2 characters, a mother and a daughter, middle-aged daughter. Kind of had this dream of opening a bookshop at some stage, and they say, oh, and they throw caution to the winds, sell up everything, open a bookshop on the west coast of Ireland, and discover the reality of the dream.
Yeah, I mean, where are we now in terms of books? Obviously, with online and all that's out there at the moment. Are we still selling books?
Oh, absolutely, no question. When I go into bookshops, I get sort of 2 different messages from readers and from booksellers. One is that live bookshops are the hubs of their communities. People love coming in. People like Mick Finucane, who owns Chapters, they'll put on events. They'll say, come on in and sit down and just, be part of the place as well as buying books.
And people, instead of the Kindle, people love the hard copy, right?
People love hard copies. You and I were talking earlier, the smell of books.
Yeah.
The feel of books.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's this sort of sense that people might read them online. There's reasons why they might want to, buy online and read on their Kindles. But there's something beautiful about actually having and holding a book.
And one of your own is even better. Right?
Absolutely.
Felicity, thank you so much for joining us. All right, we're popping over to Una Woods. Good morning to you, Una. Una, we met you earlier on the top of the hour. How did you get involved as an illustrator? How did you become one?
Well, I was always drawing, and a few years ago, O'Brien Press had a perfect picture event for Culture Night, and I took part in it, and that's how I got my first book, the Have You Seen the Dublin Vampire, published.
I mean, what is the process involved becoming illustrating a book?
Well, it's quite a lot of work. It could take between a year to 2 years to illustrate a book. If I'm illustrating a book that I've written, I always kind of have to visualise it first and draw some of the pictures. Whereas sometimes I'm given a text I'll have to illustrate, so that's a totally different process. I have to imagine what type of characters the person who wrote the book would.
Yeah, and you were telling me you don't really liaise with the author,
no,
so it's your own
don't.
creative process
Yes,
from start to finish.
So you can kind of be a tiny bit worried. You worry, will they like what you've created? But it's really good fun.
And of course, you're just down the road in Clontarf, the home of Bram Stoker, and that inspired this book.
Yes, I kind of got a lot of ideas for my books when I'm out for walks. And one day I was walking past the park in the Marino Crescent, and I was looking in, and I saw the big tree in the middle of the park, and I could see where Bram Stoker lived when he was a little boy. And then that's how I kind of thought it'd be really nice to write a story about
Absolutely. Una, thank you for joining us here this morning. Now, we're going to pop over here to Tori. Good morning to you, Tori.
Good morning.
Tell us what's your favourite Irish book?
My favourite Irish book is Scythe by Joanna Keane O'Flynn.
There we go. And in fact, you're studying that in school at the moment. Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it so much because she's like my age, and it's set back in a way like years ago day, and like seeing her daily life is just so interesting.
And you feel you can relate to it?
Yeah, I actually can, because she has like obviously different problems, but she's a teenage girl, so
and you like the book?
Yeah, I love it so much.
What about you, Lola? What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading Skullduggery Pleasant by Deric Landy.
Okay, tell us about the story itself, the book.
Skullduggery Pleasant is a paranormal detective book, and it is about Skullduggery Pleasant and Valerie Crane uncovering mysteries and saving Ireland.
So it's a good read, especially this time of year, right?
Yeah, very spooky.
Yeah, perfect for Halloween. And what about you, Ciara?
I'm reading The Weight of Water by Sarah Crossan.
Okay, what's it about?
It's about just like a normal teenage girl who has she's trying to find her father, trying to make friends, and she loves swimming.
She does, like myself. What is it about books that you love, Ciara?
The way they're written. It depends on the way they're written, if they're written like a poetic form or just a normal kind of book form. But yeah.
Do you get lost in the book?
Yeah, sometimes I do get lost in a book that I really like, and then I can't hear what people are saying to me sometimes.
There we go. To Ciara, Lola and Tori. Now, Mick, you're the man responsible for Chapters Bookstore, because you own the shop itself.
I do, yeah. Myself and my business partner, Kevin Neary, we reopened Chapters just over 2.5 years ago. It closed after just over 40 years.
Yeah,
trading.
And I mean, this is an iconic bookstore in the heart of Parnell Street. You obviously went to the wall and you brought it back to life.
Yeah, we're working hard at it. We get better each week, or at least we try to get better each week. And you know, we believe that Chapters is really important. We feel it's an iconic bookstore, and it's really important to the people of Dublin.
And it really is a reader's paradise. How many books are you talking in here?
We have over 300,000 books.
Wow, it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. You know, places like Chapters are fantastic. You can find a book that you never knew you were looking for.
Where can we find out more online?
Chaptersbookstore.com.
And we're celebrating Irish Book Week. There's a section on the website.
We certainly are, and we're so lucky to have so many great Irish authors.
All right, from Mick, Una and Felicity here. What's your favourite book, by the way?
Oh my goodness me! Whatever one I've recently written.
She would have to say that, wouldn't she? All right, lads. More later on. Back to you guys in the studio. Thank you, Felicity. That's lovely. I love your book.
That is so fantastic, and thank you for highlighting that. Not only Irish authors and illustrators, but also supporting your independent bookshops around the country for this book week. They do so much, so it's fantastic.
And we're in such an amazing country with so many amazing authors out there as well, aren't we? So spoiled.
Incredible. We had a great show this morning. We were chatting to Lionel Richie earlier on, and I love this from Bridine. She said, I officially now hate Alan and Tommy, getting a backstage invite from Lionel Richie himself.
There you have it.
So fancy.
All night long.
So fancy. Now, tomorrow on the show, comedian Russell Howard talks swapping gigs for nappies.
We're going to discover the benefits of listening to classical music and learn all about the male G-spot.
Plus, spicy meatballs on the menu, quilted jackets on the catwalk, and loads more. We'll see you tomorrow.